I watched the Leeds United game today. We were in the FA Cup semifinal. Um, we lost, but just a heads up, I've had several beers across the course of the day from like 11 a.m. until currently as we speak. I'm drinking, so you got to keep the train rolling, otherwise, like it dies on the line. So
I feel like this is probably a good book discussion to be a little boozed for.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So speaking of, welcome back to Self Destruct. We are talking about part 2 of Playworld today. So thank you, Taylor. Let's actually just jump right in because I've been wanting to talk about this book for a while. I think I was the first one in the group to finish it, even though I guess, Taylor, you've read it before, but this time around. And I've been wanting to talk about it with you guys for a while. It's just, our band had a show, Will's a father, so he has to do dad duties. And so we weren't able to get around to actually filming this episode for a while. And so I've just been itching to talk about this book, and especially this, part 2. So diving right in, let's start. Will, give us your impressions of part 2.
So I liked both parts. I liked part 2 better. I just feel like there was really good progression. Obviously in Griffin, the main character, there were some nice conclusions to some of the plot lines, obviously, as you would expect toward the end of a book, but he did a really good job of setting things up, and then you could foresee how they could go on even after the story ends. There was one of my favorite scenes, I think, in the book, which we can talk to later, but it's the Ferrari scene in the koi pond.
Yeah.
Dude, it played in when I was reading that, it played in my brain like an 80s movie, and I could just hear the soundtrack. That scene is just so visceral and incredible. So I mean, I think it really ramped up and it tied it together really nicely, and really enjoyed part 2.
Yeah.
What about you, Jensen?
Yeah. It definitely felt like this progression, and where it really felt like, because this is the point where the coming of age happens for Griffin, where a lot of the things that either he's really too young to understand that he is going through, or just these traumatic events or whatever you want to call it, is really fleshed out, where he has an understanding and is able to make some clear-cut decisions and get away from it. But also there's the progression of some of those, and it really takes him a lot longer, and you kind of see him kind of being pulled down further by some of these. It was phenomenal for sure. Taylor, give us
agreed.
Give us a more coherent analysis of the part 2.
Well, I'll just say, this is the second time that I've read the novel, and so I feel like this time I got to pay a little bit closer attention to just kind of the line by line composition of the thing. And, because the first time when you read something, and I was trying to read it pretty quick the first time I read it, which was a while ago. And, just because I wanted to see how the plot would wrap up. And so some of the more technical aspects of it, I was a little bit less aware of, and my notes were a little bit more about plot points and themes and all this kind of stuff. But this time I got to pay a little bit more close attention to the writing, and just really, really was impressed. There's a lot of just great technical writing going on. There's a lot of clever through lines that come back around from part 1 into part 2. I'm not sure which is my favorite part. I mentioned on the last episode that there's a scene in part 1 that was my favorite in the book, the Mark David Chapman bit. I really loved that particular scene, but I think I agree that part 2 is, I think it contained some of the parts that hit me the hardest. And we'll talk about this as we kind of discuss the plot a little bit more succinctly, but there's a few parts in here that I just related to on a more visceral level. Some of his writing around, the almost failed courtship with Amanda and all this kind of stuff was just like devastating to read. It's so perfect. I feel like I assume that you guys can relate to it as well as I can. So we'll definitely talk about a lot of that, but all in all, just a great book. Really enjoyed getting to read it again. Very excited that we'll have Adam on to talk about it a little bit deeper. That'll be really, really fun. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Will.
Well, I was just gonna say, speaking about the failed courtship, near failed courtship with Amanda. Another one of my favorite just like scenes was the retelling of his dad's story, lost love interest, lost love interest. That story was brutal. I mean, in like really in itself, you could have plucked that out and just had that as a short story. It was so well written and just so complete. But I loved that also in particular because it really, really humanized his dad for him. And after that point, there was this clear, like, kind of understanding between them. They really started to open up, more so together. And I thought that was a really special kind of turning point after that. So, sorry, go ahead, Jensen. You were going to say.
There's obvious parallels between the situation that Griffin's dad had with his, first love, and Griffin's love story that he had with Amanda, where you're dealing with an emotionally unavailable woman that wants to drag you around on her hook. And it's not until it's too late that like it's obvious that like nothing's going to work out. With his dad's situation, it was a bit more violent of an end, but with Griffin, like it's the way it typically ends in those situations. And yeah, Taylor, that is definitely an experience that I have some personal experience with, and I've watched it happen to friends, including you. Just want to drag up Taylor's dirt.
Yeah, why not?
Man, that was like tough to read. Like especially where he goes to visit her when they're at the beach house, and she ignores him and is rude to him. I remember reading it and I was like, dude, you can tell she's not interested. Just like blow it off. Don't go.
Move on.
I've been there, and like you still go because you're holding on to some hope that like something's gonna happen, and like you'll have this like big romantic moment, but it doesn't work. And it's only whenever he can be useful to her does she value him at all.
Mm-hmm.
And
so many of the toxic relationships in his life mirror that in different ways, and maybe that's just kind of a universal thing, that like toxic relationships are so one-sided in that way that when you're needed for comfort or for some other intangible thing, like people will use you if you let them, which seems sort of trite to say, like it seems obvious, but I feel like the way
when you're in it,
no, it doesn't. It feels, it feels exactly how he wrote it, which was just so impressive. It was just, at different points, it was like, I was like, man, are you like reading my mail, dude? Like, he just has he has a great way of rendering those kind of like hard to discuss emotion things that seem like I'm having a hard time even coming up with the words for them, because they're things that are just like feelings and they're hard to express, and he just like perfectly renders them somehow. And I'd love to ask him about that a little bit too. Like, how did you remember what that felt like?
We talked about this a little bit in part one, but he has that realization of he is just playing the part for each person. Even when he and Sam were, kind of having their drive, and, he realized he was sort of like fulfilling that role for him too, as like kind of his like surrogate son and all this stuff. And yet he was still like, sleeping with his wife, and like, just like, it was just this like really kind of, and he was playing a part for her. And, he even mentioned like in pretty visceral detail about how like he just knew what Naomi needed, even in those like physical moments, and just played that part because he was just so used to that. And it wasn't until, toward the tail end that he has that realization that I couldn't even see myself. He's like, and it's so funny because I was just being observed the entire time. And he, it's incredibly powerful when he has that final, like, oh, okay. I also think, well, I'll save it for a later conversation. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but yeah, there's just a lot of obvious discovery in part 2, which you would imagine as he starts to come of age and really, grow into himself a little bit more. But that was what was just so apparent. And yes, the writing was incredible, and the way that he had all these relationships. I mean, there's so many characters that like enter in his life, and yet they all play some sort of really interesting. They're part of this labyrinth that he kind of has to navigate, and it's really pretty awesome. So
yeah, I feel like he does a really good job of like creating a world where like whenever there's a character that's introduced, it feels like you're living in Griffin's shoes. Because I think we've all read books where they just throw characters at you and they're whizzing by so fast and are so inconsequential that if that character comes back up later, you're like, wait a minute, who is this again? Right. Whereas here, it feels like I have met these people and I know Cliff Notes and I know, whoever else. And whenever you see them come back up, even in like completely different scenes and different locations, you're like, oh yeah, that's his buddy that's on the wrestling team. And I remember that person, and I like can visualize this relationship that was built over the previous chapters.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, like, you're talking about like having those callbacks to characters and shared moments. You even see that when they get the new wrestling coach, and they all have that shared realization, even, and like, and you think about that first conversation that first kind of look that they all had in the hallway in part 1, where they were like, oh yeah, like, I know what I like. They have that kind of shared trauma like, look,
we've all been with Keppelman in this situation.
Yeah. And then here you have that second, in the second part with the new coach, where they kind of have this shared, like, whoa, wait, this is a legit coach, and we might actually be great, this season, and they have that, again, shared experience, and like being able to bridge that was just really excellent. Even in this small kind of like, that's a pretty traumatic part of his story, but like even the subplot of all the wrestlers together on the team, that's just a part of his whole tale. It was really powerful writing. It's great.
Yeah,
great to pull that together.
Yeah, it really was. So part 2 kicks off. The way that he's got the book set up is part 1 is the Carter administration, and then part 2 is the Reagan administration. So you're kind of like right on the edge of those two presidencies. And tonally, they feel quite a lot different. It is kind of interesting how I just kind of noticed that like the Carter administration chapters, they don't feel quite as optimistic, and characters within the novel kind of talk about the optimism, whether, and there's different opinions within the book on whether or not the optimism, the morning in America kind of rhetoric from the Reagan administration is sincere, or, there's all this political disagreement. But it's very interesting how he structured it that way, to where the second part, it does kind of have a little bit of a feeling of optimism at first, and things are starting to gradually improve in his life. And so part 2 kicks off, and I really wanted to highlight right towards the beginning of this part the assassination attempt scene on Reagan. I loved how he wrote this part, because much like it is in real life, when you're seeing some kind of crazy, potentially historical event unfolding on the television news, the characters discover the assassination attempt as it's unfolding in the news. And it's not just like how I feel like maybe a lesser writer would just be like, this guy tried to shoot Reagan. It's not looking good. He's going to the hospital, and a Secret Service guy was hit. Instead, he rolls the story out slowly, because no one knows what's happening. Oh, the president's not hit. Everything's going to be fine. And then a few sentences later, no, he's got a collapsed lung. He's going to the hospital. I just loved how he chose to write that, because that's exactly what it feels like when you're watching this stuff happen in real time, is that there's always misreporting, or some bad information that comes in, and then everything gets flipped on its head when more information starts to come to light. It's also interesting because this book is, there's a lot going on here with this theme, and Adam Ross chooses to get at this theme through political assassination, or assassination more broadly. And he talks about it with his therapist in part 1 about John Wilkes Booth, who obviously assassinates Abraham Lincoln. And then we have the John Lennon assassination happen later in part 1. And then part 2 kind of starts with this Reagan attempted assassination. And what the theme that he seems to be kind of trying to coalesce here is that all of these people, and you might remember this when his therapist says it in part 1, that like John Wilkes Booth and all of these people, what they have in common is that they decided to try to enter history, which is a really interesting way of putting this. Is like, because of whatever they were feeling, all of these people's motivations are slightly different. And particularly when you kind of learn about each of these individual assassins or would-be assassins, they all have kind of a different motive in a way, but it's kind of the same too, which is to enter into history, as almost to make your mark, which I just find really interesting. I wanted to discuss that idea a little bit, and what he might be doing with that theme through some of the characters, and what that might mean as this book starts to unfold into the story of someone who is also trying to come into himself, who's trying to find a way to like implant himself into the world. This is one way that people do it, is through a very negative means, but maybe through a different type of self-actualization. One could also enter history, or at least enter some more authentic version of themselves. So I wanted to get y'all's take on all of that kind of going on.
Vincent, you first.
When you were describing
Sorry,
that,
I know I just like did like a 45-minute like leading into it.
now, as you were discussing the 3 assassinations and assassination attempts, at least, that we see in the book, as you're describing it, it felt very Raskolnikov-esque.
Sure. Crime and Punishment for the uninitiated.
Yeah. In that same sense of trying to prove to oneself or to the world that you're great, and like make your mark, and like put your stamp on the march of history. And I think that is actually a very interesting thing to, what's the word I'm looking for, to contrast Griffin's story through, because in a lot of ways he is kind of, it almost feels, probably through youth and ignorance, kind of blindly grasping at life, trying to make your mark on the world. And as he's progressively like maturing and coming into his own, like realizing the places where he's being taken advantage of, or where he is willingly giving up being his self. For me, like the that realization that you see him make at the end of his kind of relationship with Amanda, is having that realization that he's not living his own life by maintaining any kind of relationship with her. And like when I read that section where he finally like breaks off and is like, "Hey, I can't be friends with you. I can't talk to you anymore." And it's just like peace, and like rides off on his bike. I was like, "You go, Griffin. Good on you."
Taylor, when you were sort of setting that up and talking about that, I was listening, and you were talking about people trying to make their mark on history, and a lot of the people in Griffin's life had their own key motivators. Like it was pretty. I wouldn't say every character you could be like theirs was exactly this, but like they were clearly, like Naomi was lonely and just had some self evaluation she needed to do. And, you know, Sam was driven by wealth and, you know, success, and seeing some of that kind of come together. And, you know, his dad for a long time was just driven by the need to be accepted as like a, you know, a real like
Serious
artist. And,
yeah.
and Griffin is again kind of playing his part in everybody else's motivations, but he doesn't really know what motivates him. You know, he's being the actor for his dad, and, you know, but then he wants to be the dungeon master for his friends, and yet, you know, he puts that on the back burner because he has all these other obligations that he needs to take care of over the summer, and, you know, he never really gets time to evaluate who he is. And so, like, he's trying to make his own mark on the history. And then he has, you know, like his agents and some of the directors telling him, oh, you'll be a made man. You just, you know, this is your way out, be an actor. And he's like, but is this what I want? Like, is this genuinely what I want? Like how I want to make my mark on history? And, that was really, when you just were saying that, I was like, okay, I see the kind of the point to that, because he is so conflicted for so long, you know, throughout the book, or maybe he isn't, but he just goes along with it for as long as he possibly can until he's like, this is not sustainable. Like I have learned too much about myself to pretend that I can do this anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think that is like that's a process of like self-actualization, is he's discovering that there's more to life than just trying to be things for other people. It's really that simple in a lot of ways. And that's each individual kind of relationship that sort of converges and then dissipates, whether it's with Amanda or Naomi, or the way that he starts to understand his father a little bit more, and his mother even has some of these same conflicts, is he realizes that, like, you know, he doesn't have like in order to like be himself, and I don't even really mean that in like a trite way, but like to really be your own person, to be somebody that has will in the world, you know, and not just like a passive background character to which things just continue to happen. He takes control, you know. And I thought that was just a brilliant way to give those two sides. Is like, Griffin is somebody too that in a real way fits the profile of someone who has been put upon by the world in a really negative way. You know, I mean, the big ways are in a sexual nature with two different characters, with Keppelman and with Naomi, that take advantage of him. He's kind of, you know, in at different points he lashes out in negative ways. There's a really great scene with Oren, with his younger brother, where they're on vacation, and he sees this cute girl that goes to their school, and Oren convinces him that she wants to get together with him for like a date. And so he goes down to meet her at the tennis courts, and it's like, hey, so what do you want to do? And she was like, I don't know who you are, and this is weird. And like, it really embarrasses him, and he lashes out at his brother, and like, they get into a physical altercation, and he rips his brother's necklace off that he's like worked so hard on to like collect these shells and stuff, and then throws him in the ocean along with this shark that his brother has caught. And so what I'm kind of getting at here is that that's a minor way of lashing out that he regrets horribly and feels incredibly guilty about, and decides basically that that's not the way that he's going to respond to the world being kind of cruel to him in so many ways. Because, you know, you see that scene and there's a lot more going on than just his brother pranked him. He kind of takes out everything on his brother right then and there. And in a real way, like, that's how some of these previous assassin characters that like, they feel put upon by the world, and they feel unappreciated. Like, John Wilkes Booth is unappreciated by his family and isn't taken as seriously as his brother and all this kind of stuff. And the way that he decides to deal with it is by entering history in the most negative way possible. And I think Griffin almost gets a little bit of a crossroads there, where he's like, you know, in some ways, like, I could be this. I could end up going the totally negative direction and just lashing out against the world. But instead, he chooses to eventually start just becoming someone that takes control of his life and doesn't allow himself to continue to be victimized by people in some ways. And I think that's just a really interesting way of kind of showing the dichotomy, is like, you don't have, just because you're being horribly mistreated, like there's another way of entering history or finding self-actualization. And I thought that was just a really great connective tissue that he had weaved throughout the entire novel.
Speaking of Oren, I mean, their relationship was really interesting throughout the entire book, to say the least. There were some really just like innocent moments, some tender, brother moments. Like, I loved the scene in part 2 where Oren comes in after like recording like his mixtape, and he's like, you could be DJ McGriff or whatever, and like then they just start like dancing and everything, and that was really cool. But then there's that was that particular scene, like you mentioned, he lashes out on his brother, and then they have that moment where Oren's like, they're talking about the fire, and he just doesn't feel like he maybe he left him in the closet, it appears, like, and he was a kid, but still, that's sort of like an example of just their relationship. Like, Griffin was just on a path, and here was Oren, on the side.
And he does that does such a great job of illustrating that you hurt people in ways that you're not even aware of. And so, this happens with a bunch of characters, and this is such like a mark of a great writer that understands like the interiority of interpersonal relationships so well, that like Griffin is kind of like taken aback by this realization that his brother feels abandoned by him since he was a toddler, because he feels that he was left behind during this fire that happens at the beginning of the book. And he has no awareness around that. And it kind of, I think that starts to like soften him towards his brother even more, that, wow, I had no idea that like I had hurt you in that way. And I do wonder too if that doesn't help Griffin realize that like all of these people in his life that are hurting him, it's not even necessarily intentional. It's just circumstance, and everyone's got all this baggage, and it's a very nuanced way of thinking about interpersonal relationships in that way.
You talked about how like it was just great writing to kind of weave in all that sort of analysis of those like relationships, and how they were kind of treating each other in those ways without realizing it. But one of the things I thought was pretty interesting was like the amount of like academics that entered into Griffith's life, like Dr. West, and even the drama teacher, and they all kind of have these like monologues where they like talk about the plot, like mapping to a plot, and like Dr. West has that basically like puts him on ice with like, this like you don't even know the motivators of the character, and like it was really kind of like, to me, I was reading these as like fourth wall sort of things, like
for sure,
like, like Adam was talking to us to a degree about like, this is how I did it, like as you're reading the story. So I just thought that was really clever,
and also
cool.
Like it's I don't know if meta is exactly the right word for it, but like he's talking to Griffin as the character Griffin, who is an actor in this play, in the Shakespeare play, is where the impetus of this conversation is. But in another way, Griffin is hearing this as like, I don't know my own motivation in life,
right?
As this person who's not just an actor in that sense, but an actor in the metaphorical sense that the novel is very thematically interested in. And I just thought that was a really interesting way of, implanting some of this stuff that probably goes towards the culmination of his character arc. In the director that he's, in the Big Shot film with, similar sort of character, academizes film for him and acting. And
right.
It's interesting how those academic characters start to come around more so in part 2.
I know I mentioned I really loved that koi pond Ferrari scene, just because it was so chaos and so 80s, and just like so much of that was, I mean, it just played out it was so illustrated so well in my head when I was reading that. What was y'all's favorite scenes, or what was like particular scenes that really stood out to you in part 2?
I'll start. My favorite scene, just because like it played like an 80s movie in my head, of like the student like throwing their book and papers into the air and then just like walking off into the sunset, is whenever he quits the play at school and the drama teacher loses his shit.
That's a good scene.
Yeah.
Because it was this really great. It was kind of triumphant for Griffin, because he has started to realize who he is and what he cares about and what he wants to do and who he wants to be. And he realizes, I don't want to be an actor, and I don't want to invest time into doing this thing that is not edifying or bring me. It doesn't edify me in any way. It doesn't bring me any joy, and so I quit. And he gets called like an arrogant, ungrateful little shit.
Yeah. And he's like, that's fine. I can take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically. That is a great scene. One that I took a note of as a particular favorite was when he goes with Amanda to babysit, and they're sitting on the floor, and there's like a Godzilla movie on. And he writes so well about like almost like you can almost see it like a camera like flashing back and forth between the TV screen and their kind of nonverbal communication that's happening. And then like as Godzilla is like destroying this city, she just drops the "I have a boyfriend" line basically on him, while she's kind of been leading him on this whole time in this scene. And I really liked that scene. I thought it was, again, like it was kind of 80s movie in a way, in like the best way. And it's also like a situation that I think is extremely relatable. I also just think thematically juxtaposing this like kind of really sad adult kind of thing that's happening, more mature, like heartbreak, and juxtaposing that with like the childish nature of Godzilla, in a way, was like double heartbreaking, because he does this throughout the novel of just reminding you that this is a kid. Griffin is a kid. He's not an adult. He's getting treated like an adult all the time. He's dealing with adult stuff all the time. But this is still basically a child, So I loved that juxtaposition. I thought it was a really great scene.
Just to add just like that extra little bit to what you just said, where you're constantly reminded that he's a kid. I don't think it's I think it was very intentional that he rides off into the sunset at the end of the book on his bike.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
He like that is such like getting on your bike and, riding around. That's like such a common, just as every kid did that. And like, I think for the book to end in that way, it was just such a reminder of like, okay, like, yes, he's been through so much. You've just witnessed like this insane amount of trauma and all these adults come into his life. But at the end of the day, like, he just wants to go to wrestling practice and ride his bike and, play Dungeons and Dragons with his bros. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's quite simple.
Yeah.
Let's
talk about that a little bit. I think, I don't know if all of us have actually played Dungeons and Dragons, but I've been known to be fairly into D&D at various points of my life, or a lot of like role-playing video games that are based on the D&D rule set. So this is something that just like resonated with me hardcore. Anything that has to do with D&D. There's obviously some interesting just thematic connective tissue there with role playing, as a game, but also you start to see a new character arc emerge with Griffin, that he becomes so immersed in running a campaign, which for anybody that isn't really particularly familiar with D&D, there's a person known as a dungeon master who will either create a campaign out of their imagination that is based on the rule set, and you use all the rules and a lot of the monsters and stuff from the Dungeon Master Guide and all this kind of stuff. So it's all kind of in universe more or less, and everyone kind of knows the rules, but you can create your own worlds and have your characters, have your friends play in that universe. You can also, there's a billion books that come out officially through Wizards of the Coast or whatever. If they were, I don't remember if they were the publisher then or if they've always been, but where you can follow along campaigns that have already been pre-written with all the different little side things that can happen and all this. But Griffin becomes obsessed with like creating his own campaign, and he creates his own universe called Griffinwald that I really loved because an illustrator did a fantastic job illustrating the map that Griffin uses for his campaign, which is basically all of the, it's kind of a fun Easter egg that when you look at the book, it's kind of all of the places that the story takes place. It's basically Manhattan with some outlying areas, and a bunch of the landmarks in New York are given fantasy names and stuff like this. And while that's like just a fun Easter egg that is in there, it's also showing like that Griffin he's found something that he's passionate about that might hint at where he might actually really want to go with life, which, you know, I want to discuss that a little bit. Like, to me, it kind of suggests that like, oh, this kid is a writer. Like, he wants to create worlds and understand people and take people on a journey. But, you know, you could also see him becoming like a video game developer or something. But you definitely see, like, with the introduction of D&D into his life, that he finds something that he's passionate about that I think is a little bit deeper than just the game. So I wanted to see kind of what y'all thought about that.
One of the things I was maybe reading into, whether I was correct or not, was just the fact that, like, as a dungeon master, it gives you control over your world.
Big time, yeah.
So, like, I was just thinking when he was creating his world and creating these characters and the situations in his world, like, for him, that was a safe and comfortable place for him to just explore himself without feeling like I'm gonna have to be anything to anyone else. I don't have to do anything based on anyone else's input. Like, this is my space. So that was one thing when I was just like reading through that and seeing how excited he was about it, is he probably just realized like, whoa, I really like this because this is all my own.
Yeah, like I can be the author of my own destiny in a way. Yeah.
Right. So, and then again, sort of like I alluded to, like, you know, he just realized how much he watches people and like can react and play into, you know, their motivations and like what their kind of what drives them forward. And so for him, this is kind of like D&D is a great example of something that was sort of like it brought all his things that he's really good at and needed in one single kind of like task, right? Like, he's a great actor, but he doesn't have a lot of control over his life, but he wants to still be a kid with his friends, and like it just kind of came all together to a head. I just like at this pinnacle point in the book, you just realize like he's looking for something like this. Like, this is he needs this to ground him, and really help shape and realize what he actually wants in life. So, my thoughts. Jensen, what you got?
I didn't really play any of the RPGs growing up as a kid, and so like I have a bit of a different relationship with that, but it's obvious that he was exerting some level of control by creating this world in a way that he couldn't do in his own life because he was literally a child.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's really poignant whenever you think about the situations that he's in. Like we were saying, he is treated like an adult despite being a child, and being a child means you do have a limited level of agency and control, and you're easier to take advantage of, which is why we have protections for children. Sure. But in Griffinwald, he is in control.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's absolutely part of what's going on there. I thought that was just a really great way of illustrating that part of his character arc too. Obviously, in part 2, we continue along with the underlying theme that's kind of been in the entire novel, which is everyone is acting, everyone's playing a part. Obviously in a role-playing game, everyone is literally acting and playing a part. But there's mention that Amanda is acting in certain ways towards him, and he realizes it and uses that terminology. So he's starting to little by little understand that all of these people are in a very real way playing the role of something, and even if they're unconscious to it. So those themes continue on throughout, until he kind of reaches the top of his character arc and is able to more or less escape from that cycle. But there were some great scenes, a lot of cool like little literary allusions. We get to the Hamptons where he goes to visit Amanda, and there's a lot of allusions to like The Great Gatsby, which kind of takes place in a similar environment of opulence and being disconnected and all this kind of stuff. He mentions a ton of books in the story as well. I took note of a couple of them. He talks about how Griffin is reading Darkness at Noon at one point, which is one of my favorite books. He mentions, I think, The Catcher in the Rye, if not explicitly, then definitely implicitly with the Mark David Chapman character. Obviously, something that I wanted to drill down on because I didn't notice this the first time, but he has Moby Dick. His mom gets him Moby Dick when they're out. And I noticed that there's a ton of like nautical references throughout part 2 that I didn't pick up on in part 1, if there are any. But so much of part 2 happens near the ocean. There's all these like real big culminating scenes that happen near the water, and I was trying to put all this together of like what he might be trying to say with Moby Dick as a subtext with these, like, is there like a white whale that a lot of these people are chasing, perhaps? Like, I don't know. I wanted to get y'all's take on that. I didn't really put it all the way together. I just started to notice that there was even a part where he is riding his bike past the Natural History Museum, and he makes a very explicit line in there that's where the big blue whale is in the Natural History Museum. And I was like, oh, why did he mention that out of all the things there? Like, so I figure he's doing something. And this is something that we could also ask him about too when we have him. But I was just curious what you guys think what he might be trying to do with that.
I think I got it. So there are all these characters, and in their own unique and individual way, they're all and so is Moby Dick.
The book?
Yeah. We have well established on this podcast.
This is absolute sacrilege. I will not hear it.
Dude, that book was terrible.
No, it was not.
There's a reason why it flopped whenever it came out, because it sucked. If it was a third the length, then maybe it could have been a good book. Like, and I have read a few slogs before. I think that what's that Hemingway book where he's fighting?
For Whom the Bell Tolls.
For Whom the Bell Tolls is a slog, but it's a slog that's worth it. I felt like Herman Melville
totally
didn't.
You don't think he landed the plane at the end?
I don't think he landed the plane. Maybe it's because by the time the plane landed, I was so fed up. It's like if you were to get on a flight to go to Hawaii and you're on the flight for 17 years. By the time you land in Hawaii, you're like, this, I just want to go home.
All right. Well, everyone's entitled to their incorrect opinion. I do think that there's probably something to be said for explicitly making mention of Moby Dick and then all of these whale and nautical references. And, there's probably some subtext in there about the obsessive drive towards something and going down with the ship and all of the rest of it. And I think that that's one thing that Melville does brilliantly in that book, is making you inhabit the mind of someone who is obsessed with whales. And maybe you don't find that particularly titillating all of the time, but it's very effective in its end goal. But it's fair enough. You don't have to like everything.
I'm going to find some niche topic that I am like really well versed in that's boring to everyone else. And we're going to do a podcast that's going to be 3 hours long, and I'm going to talk about that thing for 3 hours, and let's see if you get the point, if you get the hint by the end.
Well, if you wrote it really well, then I think I could probably enjoy it. I've listened to you wax poetic long enough about economic models. Yeah.
That has
but
actual...
you see,
utility.
Jensen,
Cetology has utility.
Jensen, you're successful only come posthumously. So
yeah,
you know, if you do this, you know, that's the end.
Yeah, you'll get 0 views on YouTube, and then I'll die, and some other YouTuber in 20 years will find it, and then it'll go viral.
And it'll be canonized.
Yeah.
Yes.
The greatest YouTube video of all time.
The one thing I was going to say to your point, Taylor, because I didn't actually pick up on that as much as you did, but when you say that, I could kind of see some of those descriptions. I do think that, like, it could be, and this is just me maybe reading between the lines here, like, you know, he got that book, right? And then he starts having all these, like, nautical references. Like, you know, Adam didn't write. And then I sat down to read Moby Dick again, the next chapter tonight. But you could start to imply that he's a kid who's starting to read this book, you know, at some point throughout his life, and then he's just naturally, now he has this new sense of information and some knowledge, and so he just starts to notice it.
Yeah,
you know,
that's really good.
Yeah. So like, it could just be that, you know, this is his, you know, 10 pages a night that he reads, but Adam doesn't write that into the story, and so he's just trying to pick this up. And
I think that's a great observation, and that would be a really brilliant way of illustrating that, the way that books come to inhabit your way of seeing the world. We'll definitely ask him about that. There's something going on that I think I am not quite fully attuned to. So we'll find out. We'll get to the bottom.
Taylor's
of it.
white whale is getting to the bottom of whether or not Moby Dick is. Yeah.
No, there's something. I know something's there.
Yeah. I think, like, I'm there's so much more I think I want to discuss, like, with Adam. Because I like, we have hit on a lot of the major plot points on this one, you know, and some of the really kind of key, what we believe to be the stories, but I'm very, very interested to see his take on all this. I think it's going to be, we're probably going to be all wrong in our analysis. He's going to be like, yeah, no, I didn't.
Well,
I didn't say that. Yeah.
Well, this is what's really interesting is, you know, I've talked to authors before about stuff where I've, you know, brought up something like that, and they may, in the ones that are, you know, have humility, they go, I totally didn't do that on purpose, but like there are a lot of things when one is so like absorbed into a work like that takes years and years of writing, that there are things that you almost unconsciously probably project into the text that when someone points it out, you go, oh yeah, no, I know how that got there, but I wasn't fully aware of it. Like, that's a real thing that happens, you know?
Isn't that, this totally could be internet lore that I'm bringing into this, but I'm pretty sure someone said the ending of Get Out, you know, Jordan Peele's Get Out, where she's,
I've actually never
seen
it. No.
It's a good film.
I'm about to spoil. It's not a major.
Fine. It's been out for like 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah. But at the very end of the movie, she's drinking milk and eating dry Fruit Loops, like colored Fruit Loops, separately. So she's like drinking white milk and eating these, and someone brought that up to Jordan Peele, because if you've seen the movie, you understand, you know, the kind of like racial elements,
tension kind of thing.
Yeah. Very, very clearly.
She's like subconsciously separating the races in a way.
As she's looking, I think, up like NBA draft picks, like her next target or whatever. You know, it's like a really, like, it's a horrifying scene. He's just. Yeah, but someone brought that up to Jordan Peele about the Oreos and the Fruit Loops and the milk. They're like, "Oh yeah, you meant to do that, right?" And you know, it was building up all this symbolism. He was like, "What? No." Like, yeah, he just like, you know, he's like, "No, I that's, yeah, sure. Let's go with that." You know,
it's there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And to your point, that's, you know, sometimes when you've nailed it, like you've nailed the symbolism so well, these things just come out like without you even trying, right? Like you just got it down so perfectly that you don't even mean to be building this like depth, these like layers of complexity, but you've just completely shaped the narrative and all of its like subtext, and it's just like boom, 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 and then when people realize it, it just has that like kind of really kind of warm fuzzy feeling.
There's so much cool stuff like that with really great books, because all the great books, and this one does this as well, is they make allusions to, like I already mentioned, other great works as a way of like kind of continuing the lineage. But just because of the way that culture kind of proliferates, we have, and I don't mean to get all like Jungian on everybody, but like we kind of have these cultural touchstones that are just embedded in our subconscious because of just the way that we're brought up in our culture or whatever. And like, for instance, like, Griffin, this is talked about just a little bit, that like there's a little bit of this tension with identity with Griffin, because he's kind of like he's half Jewish, but like they don't really observe Judaism as a religion. There's mention of that, but like clearly there's some identity stuff going on in there. And then I find it really interesting that like, he gravitates towards wrestling, and I was like, well, what does that mean? And then I was like, oh, well, that's really, like, if you go back to the Old Testament, like, hopefully some theologian doesn't get in the comments and be like, dude, you misremembered this. But in my recollection, in the Old Testament, isn't the name Israel given to his name? Yeah, one who wrestles with God. And it's like that in a very real way. Like, this is kind of what you could think of the overarching narrative of this story is, and you can think of God as just the transcendent in general, is that he's wrestling with trying to find the authentic reason for existence, and instead of just reacting or playing a part. And I think that's so interesting. I'm dying to ask him about that too. Like, is that something that like is just so embedded in our cultural understanding that it just came out on its own? I mean, the Jungians would love to hear that if it did, if just the unconscious projects itself through the text. There's just that's what's so great about great literature, is you can go as deep with it as you really want to.
I did look it up.
This
it's Jacob who wrestles with God.
Yeah, and I think that's what the name Israel means.
Oh, wait a minute. Jacob meaning holder of the heel or deceiver to Israel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Jacob changes his name to Israel. Man, it has been so long.
Yeah. I think God gives him a new name, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Because he wrestles an angel for like, I don't know, is it 40 days or something like that? I don't remember. But interestingly enough, but it's like the wrestling thing, the Judaism thing, it's all in the story somewhere. It's interesting how this kind of stuff happens.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to just bring up is I definitely had a little twinkle in my eye when I saw 1,000 points of light in the text.
Yes.
I figured we were going to bring that up on the podcast, but so, I was like,
for the uninitiated, one of the various things that all of us do together is we have a band called 1,000 Points of Light, which is like a post-rock instrumental, like, loud kind of a pretty thing. I don't really know how to explain it, but if none of those words mean anything to you, I don't think explaining it further is going to help. But
and now the curtain has been lifted, and what this podcast is about. It's just a long con.
We're trying to smuggle our bands into literature. We're trying to enter history subversively. But and I was thinking about that because I had read this book already before I came up with the band name, which it comes from a famous speech that George H.W. Bush gives, usually like referred to as the 1,000 Points of Light speech, kind of talking about how we're gonna, with this administration, we're gonna, do all this good and whatever. And Adam has a great line in here where he flashes forward to future Griffin, who is talking about watching Operation Desert Storm happen initially on the news, and all the missiles falling into Baghdad, I think, and he says there it is, the 1,000 points of light. And I wonder now, like we were just talking about the unconscious stuff, is like I that's why I gravitated towards the band name, was because it had like so much dichotomy in it, and just was evocative of dichotomy and complication. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I bet you that's what like implanted on my subconscious while I was thinking about that when I came up with the band name. When I reread that line, I was like, oh yeah, that's probably what jogged my initial memory, which gives us a way better origin story for the band name, even if that's not true.
Hey, it's canon now. You've put it on a podcast. Yep. We're going to put it on the internet. So
yeah, it's as true as anything else.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, that was a great, I underlined that again as just a great line. And again, a really good representation of what we talked about in the previous episode, which there's multiple points of view of the narrator of Griffin, where you get him in the moment as a teenager, you get him a little bit removed from that, and then you get a flash forward Griffin at times that is interjecting meaning into things that his younger self can't understand yet. And that was one of those great like kind of flash forward scenes. Really cool stuff. I wanted to bring up, this was like a great like almost Chekhov's gun situation, which I just threw out a pretentious literary term. People will say like Chekhov's gun. The idea is that if there's if you're reading a play or something, if there's a gun on the wall in Act 1, then it must be fired by Act 3, which is kind of a way of saying like don't include a bunch of superfluous detail that isn't going to be relevant to the story. And Adam does this several times, and the big Chekhov's, I wrote down Chekhov's sword because there's times where he's staying with Sam and Naomi where the sword is mentioned, but even before that, at like the very first page of the novel, I think he's describing Naomi, and she wears a prosthetic over one of her fingers, and that's it. He doesn't mention it again until the very end of the novel in this scene that Will was already kind of wanting to talk about. So just to catch us up to this point, we kind of danced around all the different plot points, but he ends up in the Hamptons with Amanda and her family, and he has this heartbreaking experience where she totally ignores him, and he goes out to like some teen parties on the beach and runs into some old friends, and he's having these just kind of lonely experiences, and it's very well written and really sad. And because of the despondent state that he is now in, he is supposed to be able to go back with his mother, who's staying somewhere else in the Hamptons, which is like an hour away or something. He would have to take a train. Somebody can't come pick him up, so the Shaws offer to come pick him up. His father is absent. He's on tour, touring this theatrical production that he's a part of. So his family is all kind of disconnected and all over the place. And so he goes to stay with the Shaws, and Naomi rekindles this affair, and they have this visceral affair that happens within the Shaw's house mostly. And it culminates in this scene that Will was wanting to talk about. So do you want to dive into that part, Will?
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, go ahead and finish, because you're on a good roll here. Finish the scene, and then we can just talk about why this was just genuinely my favorite, because you're on a great roll.
Okay. So they're sleeping together. Oh, like it's a thing that's happening. It's very weird. It's written in such a way that it's not romantic really at all. It's really kind of sad, and it seems like rock bottom for these characters, and everything that leads up to it, it makes it make sense why Griffin would be in this place of like, not only, we've talked about how Naomi not only is like a surrogate mother for him in certain parts of part 1 particularly, but now he's like a surrogate girlfriend, or she's a surrogate girlfriend for him too. And because his mother is kind of unavailable. She's like very depressed at this point in the novel because the father is potentially having an affair while he's out on the road doing this show, and she's like bedridden basically, and very unavailable emotionally during this time. And so Naomi kind of swoops in and is able to fulfill both of these roles for these two different women that have kind of left him out to dry in a way. Amanda having led him on for so long and then treated him very poorly. So anyway, they begin having like a full-on relationship essentially under the nose of the husband, Sam. And Griffin is even going into town to work at Sam's company, and Naomi works there too, and they're hooking up in the different parts of the office, and she almost has like this voyeuristic, like almost wants to get caught kind of a thing, it feels like. And it's just it definitely feels like, oh my god, this is going to get really, really bad, and like this is terrible for everyone involved, etc. And eventually Sam finds out about what's going on. And I mentioned Chekhov's sword. It's mentioned as Griffin's getting a tour of the house at one point that he notices this sword that's in their bedroom that is like ornate, like on display. I think it's like a Middle Eastern sword because Sam is Middle Eastern. I can't remember if they say his exact nationality, but so it's like kind of I was imagining like a sultan looking curved, scimitar kind of a thing. And everything pops off and they begin fighting, and they kind of get into a physical altercation, Sam and Naomi, and he pulls that sword out, and you think that the worst is going to happen.
Yes.
And like, so just to give you some context, I've read all of Adam Ross's published work. He has a book of short stories, and he has previous novel called Mr. Peanut. And in Mr. Peanut, like, it's brilliant. We'll have to maybe we'll read it and talk about it too. But the whole kind of theme of that novel is that somebody's kind of in like an unhappy marriage, and he doesn't like actually wish ill on his wife, but he daydreams about her dying all the time. And the novel opens with him thinking about like, yeah, what if I pushed her off this cliff, like this, and like he's not gonna do anything, but then she winds up dead. And it's kind of a little bit of a detective thing, but not really. It's kind of more of an existential like exploration into like marriages. It's a really great novel. But since I had read his previous work, I was like, oh, he's gonna kill her. like I've read his work. Like this is the Adam Ross I know. We're about to get a murder scene. So yeah, go ahead, Will.
Well, just to also, because I had the same thought. I was like, whoa, we're going there. Like this is about to happen. And not to mention, like he's already had the discussion where his dad gets his teeth beat
violent scene. Yeah.
And in graphic detail, he talks about how his teeth shards are hitting the back of his neck, and he's like choking on his own blood, and it's just like incredibly like just super brutal. I was like, okay, this I did not expect. But the fact that she gets her finger chopped, and then he goes into detail about how like because right before that he talks about like I was just like happy watching the koi like eat, just like jump out of the water or whatever. Yeah, in a koi pond. And then and then her tip of her finger falls in the koi pond, and then he describes how the koi just like went up and ate it. And it is just like a total just like cluster of a moment. And then he just was like, dude, I'm dipping. This is crazy. And then goes and gets in the Ferrari and just like books it on down. And then I love the kind of just like twinkle in the eye of like when his dad's like, I got home and I saw a Ferrari in my spot, just like where he like just talks about that. That whole scene was there was so much chaos, but it was also very just like in the time of like the Ferrari and just like so even like swords were kind of a cool thing back in the 80s. They just had the whole like, I don't know, there's just an angle to it that was just
are swords not cool now?
Yeah, you should. Oh, let me pull that down. Yeah,
I think I have you around.
Yeah, sword guy. part of the lore.
I already went full like I'm a D&D guy, so it shouldn't be surprising that I have a Lord of the Rings replica sword around here.
Yeah,
Taylor,
we've known that since we
Taylor was
we were 14 years old. Yeah,
Taylor was the best man at my wedding, and in his best man speech, he brought a sword,
brandished a weapon.
Yes.
It was good, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that was there will still mention that to me, that it was one of the best man speeches ever, and it was highly memorable. And then everybody at my wedding chanted for my wife and I to cut our cake with that sword, which I'm sure was rusty, and I'm glad that we were both up to date on our vaccinations, because that sword was not clean.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background, I didn't just brandish a weapon at the at the wedding. I read, and maybe this is erroneous and totally not true, but it was perfect enough justification for me to do this. I read somewhere online, which no story that ends well starts there, but I read online that like traditionally the best man was the groom's like friend who was or compatriot who was the best swordsman, and he would be there for anyone that wanted to challenge like the dignity of the groom to, combat. He would have, his best swordsman there at his side. And I'm sure that was mostly just like a tradition that had, maybe emanated from the Middle Ages or something that, people remember or whatever. But so I decided to brandish a weapon, and then I challenged all the men in the audience that if anybody has a problem with this arrangement, that they can take it up, with me. I'm here to defend their honor. So it was good. We have to enter history however we can.
That's
Dude,
right.
I've been married over 10 years and we're still talking about it. That tells you how good that speech was.
So wait, I was gonna say that wasn't rust. That was the blood of his blood of the orcs.
Yeah,
of his enemies.
Blood.
Yeah.
You see any orcs around? Exactly.
Yeah, it was an orc-free wedding, dude.
Yeah,
you're lucky.
damn
right. Let's getting back to the book so we can wrap this thing up. That scene definitely felt very, I don't know, it was very propulsive. It was very dramatic and extreme. And it was that thing that like you felt this stuff kind of boiling over time, and it reaches this like tipping point where it boils over, and the fight starts up in the bedroom, which had already been happening. They already had a couple of fights that Griffin was witness to, like being downstairs, and hearing them, screaming at each other. And then it reaches fever pitch whenever Sam grabs that sword. And I just like it felt there's something so like funny and almost unbelievable, but also felt correct and accurate. Was so he feels like he's about to be attacked by Sam, and so he steals Sam's Ferrari and drives all the way back to Manhattan to his family's apartment at like 15 years old, flying down the highway, and then just like calls Sam like the next day and is like, "Hey man, your Ferrari's in the parking spot." And that's it.
And he's almost kind of like, got it. Like, it's over. Like, we're good,
Yeah.
Like, I know this had a lot more to do with her than it did with you, kind of almost understanding,
Yeah. And I guess that's that thing was like in that moment of, the heat of the moment, Sam is angry about being betrayed by his wife, and he's going to lash out at everyone involved whenever he doesn't have the benefit of time to like calm down and be rational. But then the next day he's like, got it. But then like we don't really see Sam ever again in the book.
No, it ended their marriage, and Naomi is kind of out, elsewhere. Yeah. We get a flash forward scene to his therapist's funeral, I think in the 90s. And Naomi, I think, is remarried by this point, and that's kind of like one of the culminating where he's finally able to put all of that behind him when he tells her that he's getting married, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And, he describes that scene in great detail too, of just like finally, ending that, for good, maybe we'll see. I smell a sequel. I'm just saying. So, I think we'll see more of this character. I wanted to talk about just the ending in general. I think it's just great that like the culmination of his character arc is that he is able to finally stop pretending to be other people to suit other people. And the way that that's illustrated in a big way is in a couple of ways. We mentioned already that he quits the play and he tells his dad that he doesn't want to act anymore. He just wants to wrestle and do his thing. And so he literally quits acting, like in a real way, but also in the metaphorical way. And I think that's it was just like a perfect way of illustrating that like he has finally figured out who he is, or at least is on the road to figuring out who he is. Becoming a life artist is one of these terms that's used with Elliot, the therapist, I believe, at a previous point. Like he's now going to like author his own destiny. He's going to quit acting. And that sort of culminates with him going to Amanda and being, he's had these conversations with his dad about, some people, they just need to know that like, that you're there and that they're going to keep stringing you along for as long as you let them. And this is just how some people are. And, he has this traumatic experience with Naomi at the end here. And so he sees Amanda and he just tells her, I can't be your friend anymore. It's too painful for me. And then he rides off on his bike. And it's perfect how everything comes together and all the themes are fully realized. And I really, really enjoy the final kind of image that we get at the end of the novel. So I'll read it. He's on his bike. He says, I felt light as if my bones had filled with air. I passed the Dakota, ripping alongside its black iron rail, allowing myself to glide before I gently banked. I saw the wise man and two dragons. The wise man and two dragons. And then I turned towards the river and headed west. And that's it. That's the end. And so the image of the wise man and two dragons is a very interesting image. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but this is right here. And if you're an audio listener, you will not be able to see this, but you can open your book to before the book starts and you'll be treated to this 2-page illustration or photograph. You see that, guys? That's the wise man and two dragons. This is the wrought iron design of the railing outside the Dakota building in New York. And so that's kind of an important part of this novel because this is obviously the Dakota building. In front of the Dakota building is where John Lennon is shot. He lived in the Dakota building with Yoko Ono. And so if you're walking it's basically right off Central Park if you've never been to this particular location. And if you look on like a tourist map or whatever, there's a part of Central Park that's adjacent to the Dakota building called Strawberry Fields, which is kind of the John Lennon memorial that's kind of outside of where he was shot, outside of the Dakota building. So he's riding by the Dakota building and I like that image. He sees the wise men and two dragons as he's going by, and then he sees it again as he's just riding by, kind of leaving something behind. That image could represent a lot of things. To me, it sort of represents like leaving behind some of the darkness of the novel. Obviously, the John Lennon assassination plays prominently in the first part. I don't know. What do you guys think about that image? Did that strike you in any particular way? Feel free to pull it up so you can see the full picture of the I guess it's a fence kind of. I've actually been there. I took a picture in front of it last time I was in New York, because I had read this novel and I was like, oh, I want to get a picture in front of the wise men and two dragons. It's a very iconic embellishment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say honestly, like I didn't have like a super strong reaction when I first read that to that particular scene, partially because I just didn't really know about that, but under the level of detail, and just I'm not real read in on like everything New York. But I don't know, is it too obvious to say, just like to your point of like leaving darkness behind, like he had he had many dragons of his own, and here now he is somewhat enlightened, and maybe he sees himself in a way as like having sort of felled the beasts of his youth to a degree, and and maybe is becoming a little bit more of a sage. Again, perhaps that's a little too on the nose, but like there could be something there.
Yeah, and I forgot to bring this up, and you just reminded me, is a character, I can't remember who now. I just wrote down the image and I forgot to write down the attribution. But someone in the novel says that a griffin is something that protects treasure. So he protects things that he finds valuable, and like that is definitely part of his character, and that also just as a mythical beast, being kind of juxtaposed with the dragons, which I think we all kind of have an image of as being the things that must be overcome, So I think that's really interesting with him, embodying the griffin, protecting what's important, protecting treasure, and like sometimes that's yourself and your own well-being,
Yeah. Have y'all seen that there's a social media account that is it's like day one of proving every movie ends better with Born to Run, Bruce Springsteen's tongue, and like you read the ending of that of this novel, and I immediately hear taka 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 da, that, and like Born to Run like kicking off.
Yeah, nice. That might be a perfect if there's an adaptation, that would be a perfect final credits.
Yeah.
So general impressions, guys. What did you guys think just of the novel, of the experience? Like it, love it? What did you guys think? 2 thumbs up from Jensen. 2 thumbs up from me.
Yeah, I'm really glad we read this. I think it introduced something that I needed just to read. We've been reading, a lot of. This was a really modern book, and yet it had so many just truths that I think we've all felt, and it felt really personal to me in many ways.
Yeah.
Obviously, can say luckily I have not gone through the trauma that he went through in my life, so I'm not saying that is a parallel in my life in any degree, but just the growing up and all the complexities of relationships and everything that you experience. It was fantastic. I'm so looking forward to speaking with Adam just to get deeper detail into his mind and some of the symbolism that I might have missed when in my first pass. So that'll be awesome.
No, totally agree. Really, if you guys are just listening to this and you haven't read it yet, pick it up. It just came out in paperback like a month or so ago. You won't regret it. It's a great novel. It just really is. I think it surprises I feel like having read it twice now, I picked up on so much more the second time. It's very well written. There's a lot going on. You'll really enjoy it. And though it's, 500 pages, it seems like an undertaking. It reads quickly. The narrative is propulsive. You want to find out what happens to these characters. It's not a slog like Jensen said Moby Dick is.
Not like I said it is, like it literally is. Moby Dick is a slog.
I'm gonna make you guys.
So.
Yeah, if we ever get like enough listeners to like that want to troll you, they're gonna vote for that to be one that we have to do on the pod, and I'm gonna enjoy every second of watching you squirm your way through that novel again.
I'll tell you this: we will need something in the order of like 10,000 likes to even get anywhere close to me considering reading that book again. I have, since I started reading, I like had like these little bookshelves that are about like I don't know, 1.5 feet long, and I bought like a pack of them off Amazon, and each time like I fill one up, I add another one to my wall, and like I've been filling them up with the books I've been reading. Moby Dick is not on one of those bookshelves. It is like in a drawer in my closet, And
Well, I'm kind of impressed by that because even if you didn't like it, I'm impressed that you didn't want to show it off as something that you have overcome to at least be a little bit like pretentious about. So that's a dedication to hatred that I think is notable and respectable.
I am the king of grudges. I will hold them forever, and I have a grudge against Herman Melville and Moby Dick.
Did you know?
All right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, can we just say 100,000 likes and Jensen will do a monologue of a part of Moby Dick in full dress? Can we just? You'll do that,
we're gonna
right?
make him be Captain Ahab.
You get 1,000,000 likes, and I will read a chapter in a dress.
100,000, not a million. 100,000.
No. I said not in full dress, in a dress. I will wear a dress for 1,000,000
Did you know
likes.
that? I just found this out. This is totally erroneous, but whatever. It's our podcast. We can do whatever we want. Did you guys know that the artist Moby is he's like the great grandnephew of Herman Melville, and that's why he calls himself Moby from the novel? I found that out.
Wow.
Yeah. How
That's
about that?
dumb.
Whatever. I think that's a pedigree. Okay.
That's pretty sick.
So, I kind of thought that what would be neat is to read a novel that was heavily featured in this novel, and maybe we'll do a couple that were heavily featured in this novel. And since, as we were talking about it, we realized that nobody had read it, or at least hadn't read it in a very long time. So we're going to revisit it and see if there's anything else there that we pick up on as adults that as forced to read high schoolers we didn't pick up on. So the next Shelf Destruct book club pick and the next full non-bonus episode will be on The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. We're just going to do the whole book for the episode. It's not super long. I think we're going to get through it really quick. I'm just interested to see what parallels we might be able to draw through this book. If there's anything that we pick up on just through culture that we, didn't realize comes to us from that novel, which seems to be such a, it's a required reading book. So let's see what's there and why they made us read it to begin with. So The Catcher in the Rye is going to be next for our book club. Be on the lookout for the bonus episode that we're going to have with the author of Playworld, Adam Ross, where we're going to sit down and discuss the novel and ask him questions. So if you guys want some of your questions answered, leave them in the comments on YouTube or TikTok or wherever else we post, Instagram. Get some questions in. We'd love to ask some listener questions. So we hope you guys have enjoyed these discussions, and we'll see you soon for The Catcher in the Rye on Shelf Destruct. Nice hanging out with you guys.
Good to see you, boys.
Shelf Destruct!